What does Chrysostom say about this passage, about this final judgment? He says, notice how easy Christ's commandments are. He didn't say, I was in prison and you set me free. He didn't say, I was sick and you raised me up again from the dead. He said, you visited me and you came unto me. And Chrysostom says that when we consider this last judgment, we have to consider the wisdom of God and the just nature of God and his basically his demands upon us.
During this meeting with my colleague Rhonda Boyajian, and we'll make sure this session goes smoothly. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. As you have just seen, this meeting is being recorded, and we will be taking screenshots as well, both of which may be published. If you do not wish to appear on video or in any screenshots, we suggest you turn your video off. We ask that you remain on mute throughout the session. If you accidentally go off on mute, we will mute you to avoid any distraction from the presentation. And we will monitor the waiting room throughout the meeting. So if for some reason you have technical difficulties and get bumped off, we'll help you get back on. With that, Gerard Nigoghos, I would like to invite you to give the opening prayer.
Very good. Thank you, Deacon Armin. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Jesus, wisdom of the Father, give me wisdom to think, to speak, and to good in your sight at all times. Deliver me from evil thoughts, words, and deeds. Have mercy on your creatures and upon me, a great sinner. Imastutun hor Jesus, durins imastutun, Sparis chorhel, yev chosel, yev korzel arachi kohamen ainjam, ichar chorutots, ipanit yev korzos pergelzis, yev ormia koaradzos yevins pasmavares. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Gerhard. And I'd be remiss if I didn't forget, I forgot Vartan Sarkisian, who's also a key member of the Democratic Adult Education team. I didn't mean to leave you out, Vartan. Thank you for all you do. You are the linchpin to this operation, if you ask me. So thank you. With that, I'd like to turn over to Rhonda Boyajian, who will have a few words before we begin our presentation.
Thank you, Deacon Armin. Last week, Father Arshan Ivazian taught a class titled Bringing the Word of God to the People of God. He taught that sharing the Word of God is the core and purpose of our celebrating and gathering together for Bazarak. We learned that the lectionary is a collection of select scriptural readings on what we read and when we read it during our Bazarak. It also includes rubrics on what we are celebrating, feasts, etc., according to the liturgical calendar of the Armenian Rite. We also learned that the first Armenian printed lectionary was printed in Venice in 1686 by a priest from Yerevan. Thank you, Armin.
Thank you, Rhonda. And with that, I would like to present the bio for Der Nigoghos Aznavourian. Father Nigoghos was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and he grew up in the greater Boston area until he moved to Rhode Island as a young adult. As a young adult, he attended and served at Saints Sahag and Mesrub Armenian Church in Providence, Rhode Island. And in 2014, Der Nigoghos received a Bachelor of Art in Philosophy from Rhode Island College. He is a 2020 graduate of St. Narcissus Armenian Seminary and St. Vladimir Orthodox Theological Seminary, of which I was his classmate. Proud to be his classmate, have to add that. Additionally, Father Nigoghos and his wife, Yeditskin Julianne, spent 10 months studying at Gevorkian Theological Seminary at the Mother See of Woliech Madzin in Armenia a few years ago. He loves playing instruments such as classical guitar and the saz, as well as learning new languages. And he is self-taught in a few languages. I note that from what I've seen, witnessed myself. He's grateful every day for the support and love of his wife, family, new parish, St. Mark Armenian Church in Springfield, Massachusetts, where he was ordained It's hard to believe, but just over 5 months ago. Time flies. Derar Parametsek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Parishionur. First of all, I'd like to thank Rhonda for reaching out to me and inviting me to give a presentation on this subject. This is one of my most beloved subjects, the subject of the social teaching of the church, and especially that of St. John Chrysostom. So I'd like to thank Rhonda, I'd like to thank Vartan, Arpi, Deacon Armen, and the entire Vemkar team for inviting me and having me host, or having me present at least, for this great Tuesday. We've had some great presenters this season, this semester, I guess you could call it. So it'll be a tough act to follow, but if I'm a quarter of as good as our other presenters, that'll be enough for me. All right, so let me see if I can share my screen. Let me see here. Again. Okay. Present. And let me see if I can. Oh, 1 second. You should be able to see me as well, though. Can you see me or no? Are you able to see me, everyone?
No, we can't see.
No.
Okay. Let me just do this real quick. We'll do this, and then we'll do video. Okay, you should be able to see me now.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. So the title of this presentation is The Homeless Christ, the Social Teaching of St. John Chrysostom. And we're going to start off with a picture. Some of this presentation is going to be interactive. So what is this that we see in front of us right now? What is this a picture of?
A bench.
It's a bench. What kind of bench?
Wooden bench.
It's a wooden bench. Is it just wood?
Only 3 people can sit.
And metal.
A metal.
It's a park bench.
It's a park bench.
And it's
Mhm.
sectioned.
Yes, it's a bench that doesn't allow anyone to sleep on it.
There you go.
Right.
Why? That was Margaret?
Library for a very long time.
Took a
Was
while.
that Margaret?
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Get the
Yeah.
metal.
Yeah. So this is a specially designed park bench that does not let you sleep on it, right? It gives you 3 different individualized sections. And if you were someone that was trying to sleep on it, you'd look like this. It'd be very uncomfortable, very impractical to sleep on.
It's not
Uh,
showing up.
There's no picture.
Doesn't show. Nothing's showing.
Oh, nothing's showing? What about now?
There we go.
Yes. A section.
Yeah. Okay. It might take, I think there might be a little bit of a lag, so forgive me for that. So,
This is the same picture as before.
Yeah.
oh, what
The
about
bench.
now?
No, still 3 sections only.
Yeah, sure it matters. Continue.
Yes. So, thank you, Deadhide. So imagine if you were trying to sleep on this bench, you wouldn't be able to, right? So what do you think? Has anyone heard of why there might be benches like this?
To prevent homeless people from sleeping on it.
And why would you want that?
For the city to be more beautiful.
You're right, correct. Right. So you don't have people that are sleeping on it. You don't have people that are kind of congregating around in the park and kind of making almost like a tent city or whatever, right? Can you see the picture that's in front of you?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. What is this a picture of?
Homeless person.
It's
Somebody
a
laying wrapped in a blanket.
Jesus,
This
Jesus.
is Jesus, I could see
Oh, what do you mean?
the pierced feet.
Okay, one at a time.
It's so cute.
So why is it, how do you know it's Jesus?
Pierced feet.
Pierced feet. right? So this is a famous or somewhat famous sculpture installation that was done, I think, in Europe, but I could be wrong. And it was done to basically, you don't see who the person is, but you can tell that it's Jesus because the feet are pierced, right? So it's basically saying that, what is it saying? What is the purpose of this installation, this sculpture?
Jesus was homeless.
Jesus was homeless, right? Jesus was homeless. Jesus was naked. Jesus was in prison, right? All of those things that we consider to be the worst thing that could ever happen to someone, or the worst thing that someone could be, or the burden on a society that someone, quote unquote, might be. Those things, that's what Jesus was.
He also said, what you do for others in need, you do for me.
Correct. That's right. So with this in mind, what are the words that we hear people using about the poor? What are the words, in just one word, give me adjectives. What are some words that people have used to describe poor people, quote unquote,
Lazy.
or homeless people?
Lazy.
Lazy.
Bums. They call them bums.
Bums. Yeah.
Dirty.
Mentally and deranged.
Deranged. Yeah.
Deranged.
Those people.
What was that, Denrich?
Those people.
Those people.
You don't want those people.
Undesirables.
Undesirables.
Deplorables, as one said.
Deplorables.
Sick,
Smelly, dirty.
Smelly, dirty.
sick or mentally ill.
Right. So, I mean, we can go on, and I don't think that's the end of it. That's probably just the tip of the iceberg about how people talk about the poor, right? So think about all of those words that either we've heard ourselves, or that we've heard others use about the poor, or that we ourselves may have used about the poor. So we said lazy, mentally deranged. We said smelly, dirty, bums, right? All of those words, all of those bad words, those are applicable to our Lord and our God, Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ was named all of those things, I'm sure, in his lifetime. He was homeless, traveling from city to city. So what we say about the poor says more about us and our own spiritual disposition than it does actually say about the poor. What we say about the poor and the words that we use to describe them tells us about our relationship with Christ and how mature it may or may not be, and how much room there may be for growth. So with this in mind, what might it feel like to experience poverty? And this is actually a term that some people may be aware of. In society, we're starting to switch away and try to kind of get away from the word poor, a poor person, right? We want to get away from those words, or just like you would get away from the word of someone is, I don't know, poor, because that denotes that position of poverty is permanent, right? There's nothing that they could do, or there's no situation where they could be able to get out of poverty. So we want to use this phrase, someone who is experiencing poverty, right? Because that gives kind of a hope, that gives a light at the end of the tunnel, that gives a sense that this person is not poor because of some sort of what do you call it? Degartune or weakness or lacking on his or her part, but it's actually something that can be, if given the right circumstances, if given the right tools, that can be overcome. They're experiencing poverty at this moment, but they may not always be poor. So what are the causes of poverty? Maybe let's just start with a short discussion of what do you think causes poverty?
Education.
lack of education, I'm assuming. is what you mean.
Well, don't you think we need to define poverty first of all? Because there's many levels of poverty.
Yes, we can do that. Yeah, that's a good idea. What would you think poverty looks like? What is poverty for you?
Homelessness,
Homelessness. Yep.
no food, no money,
Correct. No food, no
Shelter.
money.
Lost your job.
Right. Right. So these are big things, and these are kind of these are things that kind of affect one another. They're kind of interconnected, right? So we talk about lack of education, right, as perhaps being a cause of poverty. Well, even if someone has access to education, if someone doesn't have a permanent place to live, if someone doesn't know where they're going to get their next meal, even if there's a public education system, right, till grade 12, the chances or the possibility that someone who is experiencing poverty will succeed or even do somewhat well in an educational system are going to be very much lower than someone who has a permanent place to live, who has two parents in a household, who lives in a safe neighborhood, and who is not moving around from place to place or is living on the streets. So some of the yes.
How about emotional poverty? How about intellectual poverty? How about even though you may be rich, but you may be terribly poor in other areas that, you know.
Yes, those are definitely very important areas to talk about. Unfortunately, that's the topic of the current. We want to limit the topic of the current discussion to material poverty, just because of the scope, right? If we went into that, it would take much longer.
Yeah.
So for material,
we're talking about material.
Correct.
Poverty.
Correct.
Yeah,
For right
that's
now.
good.
So causes of poverty: lack of shelter. We named that. Food insecurity.
mental illness, abuse, sexual abuse.
Right. So yes, I'm going to list some of these. Physical disabilities, lack of access to health care is a cause of poverty. Unemployment, absence of social services, gender discrimination, poor infrastructure, government corruption, limited access to clean water. These are a lot or many of these things in our nation we are lucky to have usually.
Also, it's cultural, embedded culture in certain levels of society that they're poor because their parents were poor, and it's becoming like a culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a I guess there's a term, cycle of poverty, right? So this is what it goes into, right? It's if one generation experiences poverty, the probability that their offspring are also going to experience poverty goes up exponentially. And poverty is it's not something that happens to specific groups of people either. Poverty can happen to anyone. Actually, poverty can happen to anyone on the Zoom call right now. Think about the war in Artsakh, right? People who were living on the borderline, right? They were living subsistence, right? Day to day they were living. And then you add a natural disaster, or in their case, a war, right? Where they had to flee their homes, they had to take their belongings and are now refugees. That is a direct cause of poverty. So the effects of poverty. Effects of poverty is that someone has substandard housing. They don't have safe housing. Homelessness is an effect of poverty. You don't have any housing at all. Inadequate nutrition, right? And that affects your ability especially for a child, right? That affects their ability to comprehend and interact with the world. Inadequate childcare, being left alone. Lack of access to healthcare is an effect of poverty. Unsafe neighborhoods, under-resourced schools, poor academic achievement, abuse and neglect, behavior and socio-emotional problems, physical health problems, and developmental delays. So the effects of poverty are, I mean, if you start off in life very poor, I mean, our idea of poverty in America is one thing, and then if you expand that to a global stage, it's something even completely different in a lot of ways. The chance or the probability that a child who is experiencing extreme poverty, that they will be able to support themselves or be somewhat successful when they grow up is very slim. It's very stunted, their growth.
Also, it promotes crime.
What? No.
No.
There's systemic racism.
Right.
Institutional racism or systemic racism.
Yeah.
I would like to add stigmatization as well. You are stigmatized if you are poor.
That's
and
right.
your life is devalued.
Right. Right. So you're seen as less than, you're seen as less of a human than someone who is not experiencing poverty. Right. You're stigmatized. Right. And that's why we kind of want to get away. That's part of like using the language of experiencing poverty is where we want to kind of go. Whether it's we're using it for ourselves or in society, because we don't want to think of poverty as something that is an absolute for a specific person that's stigmatized, right? It's something that can change. So what is God's solution for poverty? And I mean, this is kind of a difficult question to answer. And many people have many different answers, but tonight what we want to look at very briefly is one of the saints of the church, Saint John Chrysostom, and what he interpreted might be a solution or at least an approach to poverty, right? So Saint John Chrysostom, he was a priest, a bishop, and a patriarch of the Universal Church in the late 300s. His story is very inspiring. I won't go into all of it here, but he grew up without a father. His father was a military man, and his mother was a widow, and he was the only child. So basically, he grew up of very meager means, but very soon rose within the ranks of the church, and he had a very distinct care for the poor. His mission was very geared to caring for the widows, the poor, those who were oppressed as well. So a lot of his sermons, which there's thousands and thousands of pages of recorded sermons of St. John Chrysostom, a lot of them deal with poverty and how we interact with the poor and what the disposition of the person experiencing poverty is, as well as our disposition towards that person. And why are we talking about St. John Chrysostom of all people? What does this have to do with the Armenian Church? Well, St. John Chrysostom is one of the 12 Vartabeds, one of the 12 doctors of the Armenian Church, right? So along with people like St. Cyril of Alexandria and St. Cyril of Jerusalem, the Armenian Church, in her wisdom, has delineated, has defined St. John Chrysostom as one of the most important people for the theology and lived experience of our Armenian Christian faith. So that's one reason why we're studying him tonight. Most manuscripts in Armenian exist because of Chrysostom, second only to Scripture, right? So if you go to the Matenadaran, right, the Matenadaran is the place in Armenia, and it's in Yerevan, and if you look at the Maitutsag of all of the manuscripts, if you look at the catalog of all of the manuscripts, you'll see pages and pages and pages of manuscripts written by, or basically translated into Armenian from Greek by the Vartabeds and by the monks of the Armenian Church. He's quoted extensively by the Armenian fathers, especially in the what you would call the Arzatetaj, right? Like the silver age of the Armenian Church, right? So like maybe like thousands to 1200, 1300. He's very much quoted by the Armenian fathers. He was also martyred and died in Armenia. So when he was exiled from his patriarchate, he died in the mountains of Armenia. And Revont Alishan, I wrote my thesis on this. Revont Alishan, who was an Armenian Catholic monk, said that St. John Chrysostom, out of all of the churches, he belongs most of all to the Armenians because of these reasons and more. So what Chrysostom has to say, our forefathers, our fathers of the church, fathers and mothers of the church, they would have heeded word by word what he wrote. So Chrysostom, he presents the problem as twofold, right? So it's, number one, it's the spiritual disposition of the oppressor, right? So it's this, it's concerning, he writes concerning the spiritual disposition of the person that's oppressing the poor, because that's how he views it, right? In places, Chrysostom writes about how if you have two pairs of shoes and you see that someone else doesn't have a pair of shoes and you don't give your second pair of shoes to that person, you're committing theft. That's how he views poverty. That's how he views the spiritual disposition of the quote unquote oppressor, right? We are, if we do not give of ourselves to the poor, we are oppressing them. We are actively stealing from them, right? So that's number one. And he also deals with the spiritual disposition of the oppressed. While Chrysostom acknowledges that a poverty which is experienced not willingly, right? So like monks, they take on poverty and a vow of poverty willingly, of their free will. We have many stories. For example, St. Anthony the Great, he gave up all of his worldly possessions and he went into a monastery. And he lived a life of poverty, but it was self-imposed. It wasn't imposed by others, right? So he denounces a poverty that is imposed by situational circumstances, by governments, by society, whatever, right? He denounces that, but he also has a spiritual wisdom in there as well, as where the person who is experiencing poverty, even if it be unwillingly, there can be a sense of hope. There can be a spiritual restoration of their pain, of their suffering, of their trials, if they so willingly choose to do so. So, who knows the story of Lazarus and the rich man? That's in Luke 16.
Right.
I do.
Okay. Just
Carol.
very briefly.
Well, outside of Lazarus, outside of the rich man's home, the beggar was lying there and needed help, and Lazarus did not help him. Then both of them died, and Lazarus went to hell, and the beggar went to heaven, and there was this big abyss, and he was burning up, and he begged to have the beggar come and wet his lips with some water. And he was told that couldn't happen because there was a big abyss there. And he said, well, at least go and tell my relatives and my friends so that they wouldn't have the same situation. And he was told, you know, that they were already told during their lifetime, and they didn't believe it then. So they're not going to believe it from, you know, now either.
Exactly.
The abyss is there, and there's no way of crossing.
Right. There's a great chasm between us. Right. Exactly. And actually, that's very correct. Thank you for summarizing that. And it's actually the rich man doesn't have a name in the story. It's Lazarus, who the poor person has the name.
Sorry, I got
no, that's okay. But it actually adds a theological element, right? That it's like the rich man doesn't have a name. He's almost like, because he's refusing to help this poor person, he's kind of suppressing the image of God within himself, right? To this extent that he doesn't even have a name. But this poor man, Lazarus, right, who is not the same Lazarus as in John 11. They're two different ones. But yeah, he has a name because he's closely in tune with God, right? He's dependent on God for his daily bread.
How do we know that?
I'm sorry?
How would you know that Lazarus was dependent on God? Not every poor man is making it to heaven.
Mm-hmm. Well, it says you would. Not every poor man is making it to heaven, and Chrysostom says that himself as well. So you are in line with Chrysostom by saying that. How do we know that Lazarus was in heaven? I don't know if he's in heaven. Well, actually, doesn't the story itself say that when God is talking to the rich man, he's saying, you in this life experienced the good things, and now you are experiencing bad things. But Lazarus in this life experienced bad things, and now he is experiencing good things. Right? That's how the gospel account goes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true. Also, Lazarus apparently was very kind to dogs. Dogs were licking his wounds.
Right.
Maybe that's a clue.
Yeah.
He was a kind man.
Yes, maybe that's a good point. I also think that it probably speaks to the extent of his poverty, right? Like, basically, he was with the dog. He was one of the dogs, right? He was and of course, in that culture, a dog is seen as dirty, is seen as a kind of a lowly creature, not like we would imagine a dog today as a pet. They were kind of like a nuisance, like a squirrel or something. So anyway, so there's this book, and I don't know if Vartan I think he will, or Vemcard at some point will give this link to you. But there's this very good book. It's called On Wealth and Poverty by St. John Chrysostom, where he has sermons in it relating to the story of Lazarus and the rich man. And this book, it's one of my favorites. It was actually given to me as a gift by my lovely Ereskin, Julianne. This was a while ago, even before I had entered seminary, and I cherish it very much. So in this book, the subtitle of the sermons is "To Prove That No One Can Harm the Man Who Does Not Injure Himself." And in it, he writes the following, Chrysostom. He says, "I know well that to coarse-minded persons who are greedy in the pursuit of present things and are nailed to earth and are enslaved to physical pleasure and have no strong hold upon spiritual ideas, this treatise will be of a strange and paradoxical kind, and they will laugh immoderately and condemn me for uttering incredible things from the very outset of my theme." So what Chrysostom is talking about, and we'll get into it more, is basically no one can be injured unless he chooses himself to be injured, right? Spiritually, anyway. So for the person experiencing poverty, one way that they could approach their own poverty, right, or their experience of poverty, one way in which they can approach it, according to Chrysostom, is to in a sense accept it with grace, right? Accept it with a dependence on God's care, His nachachanamutun, His providence. That person could deal with it that way, or experience it that way, so that it's not a total loss for them in this life. So he continues, he says, "Many imagine that there are many different things which ruin our virtue," right? Some say it is poverty, others bodily disease, others loss of property, others when they are slandered, and others death, right? But no one mourns those who are living in wickedness. On the contrary, which is worse than all, they often congratulate them, a practice which is the cause of all manners of evil, right? So basically what he's saying here is that when we think about our own virtue, right? When we think about virtue, which is really right relationship with God, right? Which is living a life that is pleasing to God, that has a hodanushits, right? That has a sweet smelling fragrance to God. Anything that we can experience in our life, right, at any time, should not be able to enter into that. It should not be able to disrupt our own personal virtue, whether that's poverty, whether that's disease, whether that's loss of property, whether that's being slandered and talked of evilly by others, or even the experience of oppression and death. That's not to say that that's an easy thing to complete, right? That's not saying that this is something that just automatically would happen with any Christian or someone that professes to be a Christian, even with a priest, right? Even with someone that's supposedly supposed to live up to the highest of Christian ideals. But what he is saying is that nothing can enter into affecting someone's virtuous living. And the contrary to this, of what Chrysostom is saying, is that while people say that how mechken, these people living in poverty, experiencing poverty, mechken, they're it's such a shame that they're living like that, but no one says the same thing to people who are living in wickedness, people that we might glorify on the TV, people that we might glorify on Instagram or Facebook or wherever, right? No one looks at them and says mechken, right? But really, it's actually the opposite. That's what he's saying here. I think this is the final point that he makes that I'm going to present from this long series of homilies on Lazarus and the rich man. He asks us, rhetorically, Chrysostom, he says, "For what harm was done to Lazarus by his bodily infirmity, or by the absence of protectors, people that were willing to protect him, or by the coming of the dogs, or the evil presence of the rich man?" Right? Chrysostom talks about the evil presence of the rich man, right? Not the fact that he was evil because he was rich, but by the fact that his being rich and refusing to help Lazarus, that was another thorn in the side of Lazarus. It was another kind of a dig, salt in the wound to the poverty that he was experiencing. Or by the great luxury, haughtiness, and arrogance of the rich man. Did it exhaust Lazarus for the contest on behalf of virtue? Did it ruin his fortitude? He continues, nowhere was Lazarus harmed, for he was crowned, right? The crown of martyrdom. He was crowned not merely on account of his poverty, or of his hunger, or of his sores, or of the dogs licking them, but because having such a neighbor as the rich man, and being seen by him every day, and perpetually overlooked, Lazarus endured this trial bravely and with much fortitude, with much strength. A trial which added no small flame, but in fact a very strong one, to the fire of poverty and infirmity and loneliness, right? So it's two-sided. You can see that Chrysostom's view of the poverty is two-sided, right? That Lazarus, being righteous by enduring poverty, right, and by enduring the poverty that he did, and in the presence of someone that would have been able to help him, right? And also, Chrysostom is not attacking, but kind of pointing out the fact that this man could have helped him, right? This man, this rich man, who is all of us, right, at one point or another, perhaps, we are the ones that are overlooking Lazarus. We have Lazaruses around us every day that we overlook, whether that's individually on the street, whether that's in our churches, whether that's in society. As a society, do we choose to overlook those who are oppressed by poverty? So, what does Christ have to say about our relationship to those experiencing poverty? We talked about the person experiencing poverty and how they might spiritually connect themselves to Christ by patiently enduring it, by having long suffering. So what is our relationship to those experiencing poverty? This is an icon of the Last Judgment, Matthew 25, in which Christ says that he will divide everyone into the sheep and to the goats, right? The goats are the ones that do not do the will of God, and the sheep are the ones that do the will of God. Those are on the right-hand side, as you can see. If you're Christ, imagine that you're Christ. On your right hand, your right arm is all of the saints, right?
See the icon.
Oh, you can't see it?
No, no, can't see it that I. We only see Matthew, but we don't see icon.
Oh.
Hey,
What about now?
you're painting a good picture. Continue.
All right, thank you, Daddy Ephraim. So, anyways, so at the end of the day, at the end of time, we're going to be, as it says in Matthew 25, every single person that has ever come into existence is going to be either defined as a sheep or as a goat. And what do you want to be? Do you want to be a sheep that follows Christ, or do you want to be a goat that does their own will? That's the moral of the story. And you can read, and you should read Matthew 25 to find the details of that. And it's a very famous account. It's a very famous parable of Jesus. And it's the one where, if you're familiar with it, right, he says, for I was naked and you clothed me. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was in prison and you visited me, right? I was sick and you visited me, right? I was a stranger and you welcomed me, right? It's all of those, right? There's a list of basically commandments that Christ is giving us in Matthew 25, upon which every single person on the Zoom call will be judged. To the extent that we have been able to do that, and to the extent of corresponding to our means, right, and our ability, both financially, materially, as well as spiritually. Everyone has different abilities. So we will be judged on those. So what does Chrysostom say about this passage, about this final judgment? He says, notice how easy Christ's commandments are. He didn't say, I was in prison and you set me free. He didn't say, I was sick and you raised me up again from the dead. He said, you visited me and you came unto me. And Chrysostom says that when we consider this last judgment, we have to consider the wisdom of God and the just nature of God and his, basically his demands upon us. He says that Chrysostom wants us to consider the easiness of the request, for it was bread, right? God requests that we give bread to the hungry. The pitiable character of him that requests, for Jesus was poor. He's speaking about himself. The ability to empathize, for he was a human being. So Christ, giving us these commands, is able to consider that himself being able to do it, because he was in our position as well as a human being. The desirableness of the promise, for he promised a kingdom. The reward that we will get if we fulfill his promises, if we fulfill his commandments. The fearfulness of the punishment, which is the other side of the coin, for God threatened hell. The dignity of the one receiving, for it was God who was receiving by the poor. The surpassing nature of the honor, that he deigned to condescend so far. His just claim for what they gave, for of his own was he receiving. At the end of the Baladak, right, it says, and it's taken from the letter of James. Ziamenain dut parik, iverustenichal, right? For every good gift is from above. So Christ is only asking, he's saying, give to the, okay, if we can use it in these terms, he's saying, give to the poor. We're not giving anything when we give alms. We're not doing anything. We're only giving God back that which is rightfully his, that which he has entrusted to us from the beginning. So it's not ours. We don't have any just claim to it. The poor have the just claim to it, because Christ identifies himself with the poor. So final thoughts, and I don't know why it's only showing one, but the final thoughts, and then this is going to open up a discussion, is basically twofold. What can the church do? What can our communities do? What can our governments do to help the situation of those experiencing poverty, as well as how can Christ change my own disposition towards those experiencing poverty, right? It was mentioned spiritual poverty earlier, which is an important topic. And part of that spiritual poverty, perhaps, might be the words that come into our mind when we think about people who are experiencing poverty: lazy, stinky, bums, dirty, uneducated, mentally ill, right? All of those negative adjectives that come into our minds when we see someone, perhaps. How can Christ come into my heart and change my disposition from one of apprehension, from one of disgust, to one of love, acceptance, and welcoming? And with that, I think I'm going to end my presentation.
Thank you, Deadeye, for that great presentation. Obviously, a lot of people brought out a lot of voices. I think it moved them. At this time, it's now about 7:47. Let's start our question and answer period. So if you have any questions, there are 3 ways you can ask them. First way is by using the raise hand feature in Zoom, which is located below in reactions. Click on the reactions button. You'll see there's a raise hand button. You can use that if you have any questions that way. Second way is to type it in the chat. And the third way is obviously physically raising your hand. And we'll do our best to try to get through everybody, try to see everybody. In the interest of time, I know sometimes people have a lot of questions they want to ask, but we're going to ask you that there's a question, your first primary question, if you have many, ask that. And if we have time, we'll come back. We want to give everyone a chance to ask questions. If we run out of time, we can forward any questions to Deadeye. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them for you. So
I have a question.
Who is that?
Moses.
My suggestion will be that to people to identify themselves.
That too.
Moses Ferracucci,
Moses.
Go ahead.
How could we change the culture in our church where they spend an enormous amount of money on banquets and receptions and all these things just to show off or do something, I don't know, while there are lots of poor people that we can help instead of spending it on lavish $200 or $300 a plate and this and that and the other. I think there is a culture permeating, especially in our churches, that is kind of quite exaggerated. And this may not be a politically correct thing to say, but it is very disheartening for me. That's the question. How could we change that?
I think that's a great question. Does anyone have any answers?
May I?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Yes. Then, Nigoghos, I want to thank you for this presentation because it really touches the core of my heart. And your namesake saint, Saint Nicholas, was one who really practiced what Moses Karagözyan is inviting us to do, because the tradition tells us that the whole idea of gift giving started because there was a man who had 2 or 3 daughters, and he was poor, and unless he had money, he couldn't get them married off. So they were going to give themselves to prostitution, a poverty of spirit, right? So he didn't want this, and he came and threw sacks of gold through the window without being known who was doing it, so that the person would not feel demeaned, and he saved them. So I think, Moses, if our society would follow that example, St. Nicholas's example, we would really eradicate a lot of poverty. And maybe there's an invitation for us for this Christmas to follow the true example of Saint Nicholas, not piling up gift after gift for everybody, but sharing our gifts with those who are less fortunate than ours.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Yedesine, did you have a question or?
No. I was just going to congratulate the Nigoghos and try to
Thank you so much.
bring people the attention of his namesake, Saint Nicholas.
And that does not yes, that does not escape me as well. I mean, when Sirpazanhai gave me this name, I was so utterly like always over the moon because this is just kind of something that speaks to my heart, this topic. Yes, he has so many stories like that, and to really quick to speak to that of gift giving, right? The amount of lavish gifts and the amount of gifts that we give each other in not only American society but all over the world. It happens everywhere, even in Armenia to an extent. For Amanur, right? Not to the same extent, but whatever. Yeah, it's weird how that what was originally Christian, right, giving gifts to the poor, people that, or to those experiencing poverty, how it gets perverted, and instead of it becoming something that's helping others, we take it back in and we give it back to ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's the only thing that happens with that. I think that happens with a lot of things in our society, things that we think are Christian, but we really perverted it to something that's not Christian at all.
I'm going to go to the chat. I know we have some hands raised up here, but I want to kind of bounce back and forth. In the chat, there was a question during your presentation, Deadhide, from Margaret Chevian. She asked, is addiction a cause of poverty or a result of poverty? I know that came up a little bit in the beginning of your talk, and people were chiming in. It's a hard question as well, sure.
Can I perhaps call someone out on that? Is
Sure.
Yepram here? Would he like to answer that question?
Is there Yepram still here?
Oh, I'm here. I have to leave in a moment for another Zoom, but no, addiction is completely separate. It can then drive a person to poverty, well, in death also, but these are separate entities completely. And I would like to respond to Moses's query, if I could. How do we turn the church around? But that's a bigger answer. So I'm going to go to mute.
What was their question?
Moses, he asked that question. Remember? How do we change the mentality?
Yeah.
It's a big one, folks.
It's an existential question. That's the, especially in this day and age, it's hard. It's a very hard question to answer. Extremely hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Keep things going so we can get everyone shot. There's Samuel. You have your hand raised. Thank you for waiting. Go ahead.
Thank you, Deacon Arman, and thank you, Deadhide. I wanted to thank you for your very poignant idea and emphasis on laziness. It brought to mind, we often refer to the poor as, their situation, those people in poverty as being lazy. And then when you pointed out St. John Chrysostom, referring to how Jesus's words and how easy it actually is to follow his command to serve the poor. And if we have the means, and it's an incredibly easy task for us to serve those suffering in poverty, then perhaps it's I who am the lazy one. That if caring for those individuals is easy. Thank you.
Ordinance Secretary, thank you so much for your comment. I mean, I'm right there with you. I think at the end of the day, when we have these questions about, well, not saying that all of us, I've had these, well, should I give a certain amount of money to someone or whatever, or should I, whatever, right? At the end of the day, it's not going to be, God isn't going to ask us if that person was lazy or not. God is going to ask us, were we lazy in dealing with that person, right? So I think that it's going to be on us at the end of the day.
Exactly. It is going to fall on us at the end of the day. Going back to chat, just Edward Nalpont had a comment earlier with regard to compassion and charity for those who are burdened. I can only recall the statement that, quote, when you do this to the least of my children, you do it to me. Charity is the greatest. It's very important to keep in mind. And one more.
And charity, can I interrupt for a second? Charity, do we know what that word means? Do we know what the root of that word is? Caritas?
Love.
Right. Love. And in Armenian, it's translated as vormutun. Usually, or said vormutun, but usually they use vormutun, which is mercy, right? Mercy, not in the sense of like you cry uncle and I give you mercy, right? I'll stop bending your arm, but mercy is in a loving sense. That's what charity is love.
Deacon Armin, can I read something that I sent you?
Moses, I saw what you sent me. In the interest of time, I really want to get through everybody's question. If we have time at the end, we can get to it by
Okay, thank you.
A few hands raised and some other questions coming in. So I really want to give everyone a fair shot. Thank you.
No problem.
I'm going to go with Yeretskin Diane. You had your hand raised for a little bit. Yeretskin, if you can unmute yourself, please.
There we go. So, good evening, everybody. If I heard Moses's initial question about, it sounded like from a parish level and what was the banquets and the, what can we, the extravagance of what a parish may or may not be doing. I think at a parish level, to be able to give back to the local community is key. I know the Holy Resurrection for a time, and I'm assuming they're still doing this in New Britain, started a making sandwiches for the local shelters for the folks that needed a place to stay. My dead high is now trying to do that up in Binghamton. So as leaders in our own communities, to be able to give back to the local communities, not just within the Armenian parishes, our Armenia, Jerusalem, wherever, but to help those folks that are not so fortunate in the States, in your specific communities, to pull everybody together and helping them out, and whether it's making sandwiches to local soup kitchens, bring the youth in so that they're giving back something from the parish level, and then hopefully that gets disseminated over, over time. I think that's if we all do our part and be charitable in that sense, and looking at these, everybody is more equal than not equal and deserving a hot meal or whatever it might be. I don't know, just excuse the pun, but food for thought. If we're all making that sandwich together and giving back, not to dismiss those donors, because we need that too, to be able to then help other folks. But there definitely needs to be that balance in sharing the abundance that we might have. I don't know, they have it. But thank you for this venue. Everybody's been doing a fabulous job. Thank you.
It is currently 8 o'clock. We're going to go for about another 10 minutes, 8:10. I know there are a few other hands raised, and we have a couple other questions in the chat. So we'll try to get through as much as we can, everybody. I hope we can get through everybody. Again, if we don't get to your question, email it to Vemkar. Vartan can put the email in the chat and forward that to Deadhire so you can connect with him directly. There was a question in the chat from about 10 minutes ago. This is from Maren Thomas. Should we judge the poor if they are worthy to receive our help, or should we help regardless?
What does Scripture say?
Is Maren still here? I don't know if Maren's still here or not because I was put in the chat about 10 minutes ago.
And open it up. I'm probably in the interest of time. We don't have much time, but it's perhaps we're talking about whether someone's an addict, right? Like if we see someone that's in the grips of addiction, active addiction, and whether we should give to someone on the street with, whatever. I'm not going to give you a black and white answer on that one because that's a difficult question to answer. What I do know is that if you feel uncomfortable giving to a certain person because they may be experiencing addiction, or you may feel unsafe, or whatever it is, there's a couple of things you can do. I mean, there's these things called basically like to-go bags, right? Like hygiene bags or food bags or whatever that you can give, right? So like things like you can have these bags prepared in your car in your glove compartment, right? Like socks, underwear, toothpaste, toothbrushes, things like that you can have ready with Nutri-Grain bars and things like that if you don't feel comfortable giving cash. I experienced this as a priest, is this even as a new priest, right? Like I come into contact with, you can also refer to like organizations who are like equipped to help those people in a real way. So if you have a list or if you can make a call for someone or make an email for someone, if you feel comfortable doing that, that might be an option as well. But the most important point is if you don't do anything, or if you try not to have hatred in your heart for that person or disgust for that person, that might be a beginning, right? To make the sign of the cross and say, Lord, I know that I have a disgust or a dislike for this person in my heart, perhaps. Can you relieve me or remove that from my soul? Maybe that's a place to start.
And Derhar, the scripture, since you asked, the scripture does say, give to him who asks.
Right. Yeah, give to him who asks. Doesn't mean you have to give $1 million. Right? But you give something. Maybe that's like one of those bags that I was talking about.
Yes.
The most important part is to show love, charity, to real charity, love. That's the most important part in witness of a Christian.
I know time is running short. Diana Aznavourian, and then we'll get to Deder Muron. I know you two have been very patient with your hand raised. So Diana first and then.
Thank you very much. In my many years of being a Christian, it's the first time I hear any message on homeless Christ. I guess it's because we live at a time of easy Christianity, of health and wealth. This is not a popular message, but it's a very, very timely message, because per Luke 9:58, Christ himself, like you said, identifies as a homeless Christ. But at the same token, not every poor person is a Lazarus. I came in touch with people who were giving sandwiches with one church at Coney Island, and they refused sandwiches because the salad dressing was not per their liking, and they used very foul language. But put that aside, thank you for highlighting Chrysostom. What I read here is Chrysostom is calling to radical faith, not the faith of easy Christianity. Actually, he called for denounce the wealth. And when I see a person and I have a question to give him or not to give, I reason this way. My giving, I'm responsible to the Lord, and how he's going to use those resources. He's responsible. He's going to answer to the Lord. Well, that's my 2
Right.
cents.
We're all answerable to the Lord in the amount that we're given, right? So the person that, I don't know, the person that's, I mean, that sounds like a very typical situation that you're talking about. Someone is upset that they didn't get the right, anyone that's worked in with those people experiencing with those people. See, it seeps into your consciousness even if you don't want it to.
Right.
When we're working with people experiencing homelessness and poverty, you might see things like that. I don't want this because of the salad dressing or because
Very
of
hard.
whatever. And that might be due to various number of reasons, but that shouldn't discourage us from helping, continuing to help. So they will be judged with what has been given to them, which may be very little, right? In terms of spiritual resources, in terms of the care that they have been shown over their entire life. So it's not for us to judge.
Exactly.
I mean, only God can judge, right? Is the cliche, but it's really true in this case.
But I will be judged too, based on my giving.
Yeah, we should be concerned with, right, how what my spiritual disposition is first, right?
Exactly. Merci.
Siro.
Derar, if you have your question still, go ahead. Ramitzek.
Այո, Արմեն Սարգսակ կրնամ, խոսիլ։
Այո, Ramitzek, հաջիս։
Այո, ցանդ քիչ մեհրվեմ կար նախ օրնյա դերեր եւ Նիգոհոս հայրաբեդը եւ Միրոն հայրաբեդը երկու սուրբերեն են, որոնք իրենց ամբողջ հարստություն դվին եւ աղքատներուն բաժնեցին եւ ուրախ եմ որ դարվա մեջ կհիշենք Նիգոհոս հայրաբեդի եւ Միրոն եպիսկոպոսի այդ տոնախմբությունը. But meantime, it's very special, and I would like to thank on behalf of our parish from Canada to Vemkar for this beautiful sessions. And we have a couple of parishioners that they attending today. But my question is especially now today, how we can support or how we can advise our youth to support, especially our wounded soldiers, because it's a critical situation. And the meantime, մեկ անգամ Հովհան Ոսկեպիրանի արտահայտություններում մեջ նկատեցի ասելով, որ հարուստ է աղքատներով։ Այսինքն հարուստը իր հարստությամբ չի հարուստ է աղքատներով։ Մենք ալ պետք է հարուստ լանք այնքան մարդկանց, որոնց կօգնենք։ Ինչպես կրնանք նոր սերունդին, to the new generation։ Ինչպես կրնանք ադիգա բացատրել։ Շնորհակալություն եւ օրհնյա։
Շնորհակալ եմ դեր հայր եւ օրհնեցեք։ Շնորհակալ եմ նախապես որ մեզի միացած եք այսօր ծեր ներկայությունը գնահատելի է եւ շնորհակալ ենք ձեզ մենորեն ծեր ձխականներունն չեմ գիտե այսինքն չեմ գարզե որ ասի հարց է այսինքն կոնե մեր կովը գիտեմ որ հարց չէ երիտասարդներուն համոզել որ մասնակցին օգնեն աղքատներուն եւ դնանգներուն օրինակ անգամ ես հիմա փանգը գազմագերբեմ իմ երիտասարդ ծխականներուն հետ Thanksgiving-ի շաբթվա ընթացքին մենք Present թե ջաշվի փաշխենք իրենց կամ անանք բամը պիտի գազմագերբենք երիտասարդներով եւ երիտասարդները շատ գվազեն ասպաներեն երևեն գվազեն մեր իմ փորձառությունը անիգա է գարզեմ թե ոչ թե համոզելու գարիք ունենք այլ we don't have to convince our youth, right? I don't like this is the thing that turns the light on for them. Even a youth that maybe they may or may not be convinced of the existence of God, right? They may or may not be convinced of Jesus Christ as God. But in my experience, if you present to them that this is a way of serving God, this is a way of serving the church, is by serving the poor, they can more actively be involved in the life of the church. That's been my experience. So yeah.
Շնորհակալություն դեր օրհնյա։
Շնորհակալություն։
It's 8:10 p.m. Thank you for everyone for asking questions. Thank you for everyone's participation and attendance today. This is a very informative topic. Dear Nigoghos, I'm going to ask you if you can close us in prayer.
Paragraph. Think of it again. Hanun hor ye vorto ye ho queens. Oh. Christ, guardian of all, let your right hand shelter me in safety, day and night, while I sit at home, while I'm out on the road, while I'm sleeping, and while I'm awake, so that I may never falter. Have mercy on your creatures and upon me, a great sinner. Bahaban amenaini Christos, achko hovani litsi yeviveraim, idve yevikishari, inestilidan, ikanali janabash, inanchel yeviharnel, zimier pexasanet sites, yevormia koradzos yevins pasma meris. Amen.
Thank you, Nigoghos.
Thank you.
One thing, Derhai.
Thank you.
Asbas Bahaban.
Derhai, could I say one quick thing?
Sure, Chris.